We are all salespeople. Sales is part of all of our lives. So whether you do it professionally or simply in life, embrace it, master it, profit. This is Life of Selling. You ever feel like your forecast isn't a forecast anymore? It's survival. You're not reporting reality. You're throwing scraps behind you, trying to keep the dogs from catching you. Another push close date, another inflated percentage, another deal that somehow keeps surviving quarter after quarter. And eventually you stop managing business honestly. You start managing pressure. That's fearcasting. In sales organizations, fear has a way of corrupting reality. You start reporting what isn't real. And once that starts happening, everything downstream gets worse. Now let's talk about what forecasting is actually supposed to be. Not politics, not optimism, not survival, just reality. A forecast is supposed to represent the current state of a deal accurately, nothing more. First, the solution itself. What is actually being sold? Not the upgraded version you hope they buy later, not the bundle leadership wants to see, not the future state fantasy version of the opportunity. What is the real solution being discussed right now? Second, the amount, not a placeholder number, not your company average deal size, not the inflated amount you hope the deal grows to someday. What is the actual expected value of the opportunity today? Third, the date. Real forecasting accounts for friction, procurement, legal, competing priorities, vacations, seasonality. Not the best case scenario, the most likely scenario, and usually adding a little time for cushion for the unknown. And finally, probability. What is the actual likelihood this closes? Not confidence theater, not pressure, not optics. Probability should reflect the real state of the deal, nothing more. And that's the key. Forecasts are supposed to evolve. As deals change, forecasts change. As information improves, forecasts improve. A CRM should be a living, breathing representation of reality. That's forecasting. Now, fearcasting is something different entirely. Fearcasting doesn't start because people suddenly become dishonest. It starts because pressure begins influencing the forecast, the pressure to look productive, the pressure to show momentum, the pressure to have something to talk about, and slowly reality starts getting replaced by a combination of hope and fear. Fearcasting starts by reporting the deal you hope exists later instead of the deal that exists today. The upgraded package, the expanded use case, the bigger rollout, not because it's real yet, but because maybe it will be later. Then the amount starts drifting upward, not based on what's actually confirmed, but based on what everyone hopes the deal grows into. The CRM stops reflecting reality and starts reflecting ambition. Then comes the close date. Not the most likely timeline, the perfect timeline. Every meeting happens, every approval moves quickly, the stakeholders respond immediately, every light turns green on your way to the office. The close date should be an actual depiction of when you think the deal will close. And finally, probability. This is where fearcasting becomes dangerous, because once percentages become emotional instead of factual, the entire forecast becomes distorted. Now everybody is operating from confidence instead of evidence. And most fearcasting doesn't start because people are evil. It starts because people are under pressure. Pressure to produce, pressure to explain, pressure to survive. Which is exactly why fearcasting spreads through organizations so easily. Again, most fearcasting doesn't begin with dishonesty. It begins with pressure. Sometimes it starts with a new hire. No inherited business, no existing momentum, no established relationship, just a CRM full of cluttered opportunities nobody else could close and nobody else wants. So now you're trying to elevate the best 3 deals from your pile of uncertainty because you need something to work with. Sometimes it's not a new role. Sometimes it's consecutive bad months, bad quarters, a dry pipeline. And now every forecast call starts feeling heavier because you know the numbers aren't where they need to be. This is where fear casting usually begins. Not because someone is trying to deceive anyone, but because nobody wants to show up on a sales call and have nothing to talk about. So a weak deal becomes a possible deal. A possible deal becomes a likely deal. A likely deal becomes a committed deal for the quarter. And then, over time, optimism slowly stops being optimism. The solution grows, the amount grows, the probability grows, the date gets pulled forward. In short, you stop reporting what is happening and start reporting what you need to happen. Fearcasting becomes really dangerous when organizations stop correcting it and start reinforcing it. This is where forecasting conversations quietly change. The question stops being, what is the most likely thing to happen, and starts becoming, what do we need to have happen this quarter? I once asked a manager a very direct question. Do you want accuracy or do you want optics? And without hesitation, he said, both. But in reality, those two things were in direct conflict. And fearcasting doesn't stop with the salesperson. Salesperson to manager, manager to director, director to VP, VP to chief revenue officer to CEO, CEO to board. The pressure compounds at every level. Every level wants reassurance from the level below it. In a healthy forecasting environment, deals should move in both directions. Sometimes solutions expand, sometimes they shrink, sometimes amounts grow, sometimes they get reduced. Sometimes dates move forward, sometimes they move backward. That's equilibrium. But if deals almost always shrink, get pushed, lose components, and lose probability, that's not bad luck. That's a forecasting culture problem. And eventually, nobody even notices it anymore. The inflated forecast becomes normal. The push date becomes expected. The shrinking deal becomes routine. At that point, fearcasting stops being an exception. It becomes the culture. What gets tolerated eventually gets repeated. Organizations train behavior whether they mean to or not. And when unrealistic forecasting gets rewarded, unrealistic forecasting multiplies. Fearcasting doesn't just distort forecasts, it distorts behavior. Now everybody is operating around timelines that were never realistic to begin with. Forecast calls become pressure sessions, leadership expects movement, internal meetings multiply, artificial urgency starts driving conversations, and suddenly everyone is reacting to a version of reality that doesn't actually exist. The more weak deals get elevated, the more attention they demand. More updates, more calls, more meetings, more executive visibility, and now the deal that probably should have died 3 months ago is consuming more energy than healthy opportunities in the pipeline. This is where fearcasting becomes dangerous, because eventually you spend so much time defending weak pipeline that you stop building new pipeline. Prospecting slows down, discovery slows down, real opportunities get less attention. You stop advancing business, you start feeding the forecast. And eventually, the biggest cost shows up. Trust starts disappearing, deals constantly shrink, dates constantly move, probabilities constantly fall. At some point, leadership stops believing the forecast because the forecast stopped being believable. You stop managing business and start managing reactions. That's the trap. You're no longer operating strategically, you're reacting to meetings, reacting to pressure, reacting to expectations, reacting to numbers that were never real in the first place. And once that cycle starts, it becomes incredibly difficult to escape. So how do you operate professionally in an environment where fearcasting already exists? Because reality is, most salespeople don't fully control the forecasting culture around them. There's nothing wrong with optimism. There's nothing wrong with believing that you can grow a deal. There's nothing wrong with hoping timelines accelerate. Just separate what you hope happens from what is true today. Hope belongs in strategy conversations. Reality belongs in forecasts. One of the most valuable things you can build in sales, in addition to your pipeline, is your credibility. But credibility doesn't come from accuracy alone. Accuracy without success just sounds negative. The goal is to consistently close business while forecasting realistically. When leadership sees that your deals close roughly when you say they will and have roughly what you say is going to be in them, your voice starts carrying more weight. Trust gets built through the combination of accuracy and execution. When leadership trusts both your judgment and your execution, forecasting conversations become very different. And if you want credibility, your CRM has to stay current, not because software matters, because communication matters. If it's not in your CRM, if it's not in Salesforce, it didn't happen. Meetings, updates, next steps, changes in probability, changes in timing. A CRM is supposed to reduce chaos, not create more of it. And eventually, you have to stop feeding dead pipeline, which honestly is a ridiculous phrase to start with. If it's dead, it's not pipeline. Some deals need more time. Some deals need requalification. Some deals need to be pushed out a little bit. But a lot of times, deals just are simply over and need to be killed. But organizations sometimes become so emotionally attached to deals that they keep trying to revive opportunities that stopped being real months ago. And every hour spent artificially keeping dead pipeline alive is an hour not spent creating real pipeline. That's the long-term game. Not optics, not temporary reassurance, not surviving one forecast call. Over time, accurate forecasting creates trust, and trust creates autonomy. At the end of the day, forecasting isn't really about spreadsheets. It's not about Salesforce or whatever CRM you use. It's not about percentages. Forecasting is about an exercise of trust. When your forecasts consistently reflect reality, people start trusting your judgment. Not because you're perfect, not because every deal closes, but because your forecasts become believable. And believable forecasts create credibility. In sales, credibility is currency. And once credibility is established, something important starts happening. You get more room, more flexibility, more trust, less second guessing, less pressure theater, less forced optimism, because organizations stop managing you aggressively when they trust your judgment. And this is where forecasting stops being operational and starts becoming personal. Because autonomy changes the quality of your life, not just emotionally, financially. When you stop spending your time defending weak pipeline and stop creating narratives to support deals that aren't real, you create space. Space to prospect, space to think clearly, space to build real opportunities, space to grow healthy deals, build your business and your life intentionally instead of reactively. And ultimately, this work helps you reach your number, that financial number that buys your freedom and all the things that come with that. That's the real long-term game, not optics, not temporary reassurance, not artificially inflated pipeline. And honestly, this idea is bigger than forecasting. A lot of people spend their professional lives trying to fit into unhealthy environments instead of becoming trusted voices inside of them. Fearcasting is one example, but the principle is universal. The goal isn't to survive. The goal is to be trusted. Fearcasting. I'm sure you've seen it for years. Now you know its name. Recognize it, address it, and you'll be way ahead of most other sellers. We are all salespeople. Embrace it, master it, profit. This is Life of Selling.